The Boy Who Lived by Louise Charlton. Chapter 7. The Advocate. Meanwhile, in the kitchen at the Burrow, Ron sat seething as Ginny smiled contentedly to herself. As she rose from her seat, flicking her hair behind her in a flash of flaming red, Ron felt the heat rise up to his head and flush scarlet. When Hermione entered the room shortly after, Ron asked her, "Why's Ginny so happy?" "Isn't she allowed to be?" Hermione shot back, daring Ron to object. But Ron, not wishing to suffer Hermione's wrath, did not say a word. Instead, wishing to diffuse the tension, he suggested going out for a walk. And whilst Hermione gladly obliged, she was a little apprehensive about how Ron's mood would play out. Nevertheless, she approached him, took his outstretched hand, and allowed him to lead her by the hand to some nearby woodland. But Hermione's suspicions were confirmed, as it became evident that Ron was distracted, and she asked what was troubling him. After a few moments of seething silence, Ron replied, "Harry should stay away from Ginny. He'll break her heart again." "Honestly, Ronald, listen to yourself," Hermione exclaimed. "Surely it's obvious that they both love each other. Harry's not manipulating her or anything like that. Ginny's a sensible girl. She wouldn't stand for that at all." "But he broke her heart," Ron finally argued. "He can't just ditch her like that and expect her back at the click of his fingers." "Oh, Ron, don't you get it? Harry cares deeply for Ginny. He broke up with her to protect her from Voldemort, and after the war he was grieving and just needed to be alone for a while. Harry's explained it all to Ginny, and she understands. She forgives him, even though he doesn't forgive himself, and he loves her all the more because of that." "Well, she shouldn't be so stupid then, should she?" Ron retorted with rage. "Ron, seriously, you need to give her a chance. After all, she is nearly 17 now. She should be allowed to make her own decisions," Hermione commented. "Yeah, Harry should leave her alone. She's not even of age yet," Ron exclaimed triumphantly. "Ron, this is Harry we're talking about. At least give him a chance. He just wants to be with Ginny, and the moment you accept that she wants him to, this whole situation will be a lot more pleasant. For all of us," Hermione reasoned, exasperation evident in her tone. "Please stop making this difficult. Harry doesn't want it. Ginny doesn't want it. I don't want it either," Hermione finished, her voice fading as she finished her plea. Ron thought for a few moments in deafening silence and felt the rage flow through him. "You're always taking his side because he's so fantastic and I'm nothing." Ron's tone was callous and cold, cutting Hermione through to the core. "Ron, you know it's not like that," Hermione began, but he cut her off. "If he's so fantastic, why don't you just go to him?" he spat, shaking with rage. "If that's what you want," Hermione weakly replied, a single tear trickling down her face. She made no attempt to wipe it away as she stalked off up the hill, leaving Ron standing alone, watching the silhouette of the only woman he had ever loved disappear into the distance. With the afternoon sun blazing down onto the rural village of Ottery St. Catchpole, a loud crack disturbed the sleepy silence, causing a breeze on the outskirts of the field nearest the overbearing structure of the Burrow. Harry walked purposefully towards the back door of the Burrow, where he observed several garden gnomes skulking under the hedges at the edge of the garden. Harry chuckled lightly to himself as he ascended the steps into the kitchen, unaware of any event that could change his happy mood. But as he came through the open door, his stomach dropped and all the air in his lungs disappeared. He could not breathe, and for a while Harry was frozen, glued to his spot on the cold stone floor. The scene before him shocked him to the core. The sounds of Hermione's sobs cut him to the heart like a knife was slowly slicing it into bite-sized pieces. With immense effort, Harry swallowed and cleared his throat, causing the girls to look up, initially startled. "Hermione," Harry stuttered, barely able to form any words. But the girls seemed to understand, as Ginny gave Hermione a reassuring smile and pat on the back, whilst Hermione blew her nose loudly into her handkerchief, before spluttering, "Ron's just being unreasonable and taking it out on me." Harry was not sure exactly what he felt. Was it anger at Ron for being unreasonable? Was it guilt at not sorting things out with Ron earlier? Or perhaps it was just overwhelming shock at seeing Hermione completely resigned to tears. Whatever it was compelled Harry to take a stand against Ron and sort things out once and for all. "This can't continue. I had to talk to Ron, get him to see sense. And I won't leave him alone until this is all sorted," Harry resolved out loud. Thank you, Harry," Hermione exclaimed, rushing forward and hugging Harry, leaving Ginny standing next to an empty chair, mouthing "thank you" to Harry, who was now rather sheepishly comforting a blubbering Hermione. Once Ginny had finally managed to extract Hermione from Harry's shoulder, he set off back through the back door and into the multicoloured sunset in search of Ron. It transpired that Ron was skulking in the orchard at the back of the Burrow, where everyone used to play Quidditch in the holidays, slumped against the trunk of a crab-apple tree, looking gloomy. Harry paced over to Ron, his footsteps muffled by the unkempt grass and the whistling wind. He cleared his throat loudly, gaining Ron's attention. "I hope you're proud of yourself," Harry spat. Ron looked dumbfounded, and so Harry continued, "Hermione's in tears because of you." The look Harry gave Ron was thunderous, and for a few moments Ron was wide-eyed in terror and opened and closed his mouth several times before gaining his resolve, straightening his posture as he replied, "Well, I'm not exactly a bundle of laughs myself. Not that you're bothered." "What exactly is your problem?" Harry rounded on him. "Is my sister not enough for you?" Ron began, rage surging through his veins. "You take Ginny, then you take Hermione. Is there any woman who won't have you?" he continued. And before Harry could even begin to reply, Ron spat, "I suppose not, 'cause after all, you're perfect Potter. Everyone's favourite hero, who didn't know where any Horcruxes were, or even how to destroy them, yet she still chose you, 'cause I don't have a scar on my head that everyone recognises from a million miles away." Harry was flabbergasted. The attention he received was highly irritating and completely unwanted. But Harry stopped himself from bursting with rage, simply stating, "Ron, you really are an idiot. Of course Hermione doesn't prefer me over you. She was just prioritising. It was more important to finish Voldemort, so she stayed. That's the only reason. She wanted you there. Whilst you were gone she just sat in silence, crying herself to sleep at night. I looked after her 'cause she's like my sister, but I couldn't fix her. Only you could do that," he added. "You know I love Ginny, and why I had to end it. Just like you, I couldn't bear the thought of anything happening to her, knowing that I caused it. She understood my reasons, but of course that didn't make it any easier. But Hermione just gets it. All of it. How I feel about Ginny, and how Ginny feels about me. I don't even get that completely." Harry then proceeded to tell Ron about all the times that he had looked at Ginny's name on the Marauders' map, somehow hoping that she would know that he was thinking of her. How his final thought when she was facing death was Ginny. Not his parents, or Sirius, or him or Hermione. Simply Ginny, and how alive he feels when he is around her. Ron was strangely silent as Harry relayed his thoughts, an unusual feeling stirring within him. He had never felt so stupid in his entire life. "I'm sorry, mate, I'm so dumb sometimes," Ron managed. "Yeah, you are," Harry replied, laughing slightly at these words. The two exchanged a brief look and handshake before Harry said, "Come on, mate, let's go back inside. You can sort things out with the girls before dinner." And Harry and Ron made their way down the garden path, grinning and laughing, happy to be friends again. It wasn't until the two were at the top of the steps leading through the back door and into the kitchen that Ron hesitated. "What's that, mate?" Harry asked. "Do you think they'll forgive me?" Ron asked. "After all, I have behaved appallingly," he added. "Well, yeah, you have," Harry responded. "But you never know, they might just surprise you," he supplied with a smile. "Yeah, probably," Ron agreed, his voice wavering slightly. But he gathered his resolve, looking determinedly at the back door before pushing it open, the wonderful smell of dinner wafting to their noses. Initially it had been much like Ron's return during the Horcrux hunt. Hermione was oddly silent and for several minutes simply glared at Ron whilst he issued profuse apologies. It was only once Ron had remarked to Hermione that she was right about Harry genuinely caring for Ginny that she spoke. "Ron, it's really not that difficult to spot, if you know what you're looking for," she added, laughing as she thought about how stupid Ron could be sometimes. And then everyone laughed. It was a weird moment having so much laughter in such a small area, especially in light of recent events where the war had taken so much that laughter seemed out of place. But all the laughter in the room gave Harry a warm feeling inside that caused him to feel happy and contented. And suddenly all the casualties of the recent war disappeared, leaving only the three people that he cared most about. And once the laughter died down and silence threatened to dominate, Ron turned to face Ginny and concluded, "I'm sorry for being such an overbearing big brother. With Mum around, you don't need me to do that too." Ginny smirked, and after a brief second, Ron continued, "Please know that I was only trying to look out for you, as your big brother, but I think you've made a really good choice without my help." And this time Ginny smiled a genuine happy smile, one that caused Harry's heart rate to elevate and made Ginny's face muscles ache. Harry had forgotten just how captivating her smile really was, and it had been a long time since Ginny had genuinely smiled that it hurt. But she did not mind, as in this moment she could not have loved her brother any more. Then, rather suddenly, Hermione ran forward and flung her arms around Ron, who was a little taken aback but very delighted. Through her sobs he found that she was very pleased that they were finally on the same page, and the two enjoyed a rather intimate moment, causing Harry and Ginny to slowly back out of the room to give them some privacy. But they themselves only shared a quick kiss to mark the occasion that had just occurred, before heading off to their respective rooms. Harry had a letter to write to Kingsley, and wanted to use the lull before dinner to do so. Ginny did not take this personally, one of the many reasons why Harry loved her, instead declaring that she had a hot date with her diary. Harry found himself smiling in wonder at how he could have ended up with such an amazing woman, as Ginny walked towards her bedroom, throwing back her mane of flaming red hair behind her in a flurry of colour. "Focus, Mr. Potter," Harry chastised himself. Dinner that evening had been the most cheerful mealtime in the Burrows since the war had ended. Ron and Hermione had come down to the kitchen hand in hand, and joined Harry and Ginny at the table, the four of them grinning, glad to be friends once again. "I'm so glad you're all getting on again," Mrs. Weasley joyfully exclaimed to the kitchen, before contentedly returning to the last-minute dinner preparations. It was as Mrs. Weasley made lots of noise, hovering pots and pans to the table, that George tiptoed into the kitchen, with Charlie following closely behind. Mrs. Weasley absent-mindedly turned her gaze towards the mantelpiece in the kitchen, and stared intently at the blank wall, tears welling up in her eyes. And for a few moments nothing was said, until Hermione let out a small gasp, and clapped her hand over her mouth. Harry began to panic, unsure of what Hermione had seen that upset her so. Could there be a creature lurking up the chimney that only the ladies could sense? He turned to Ginny and found to his astonishment that there were tears in her eyes as well. But before Harry could break the shattering silence, Mrs. Weasley averted her eyes from the mantelpiece, instead looking down at the plate that she had just laid on the table, and slowly picked it up again. It was only then that Harry realised that Mrs. Weasley had laid one too many places at the table, one for Fred. And it was only the arrival of two figures into the kitchen that penetrated the resonating silence that had resounded since the realisation. It was Mr. Weasley, followed closely by Percy, who seemed to have a rather long stick in his hand. Glad of the distraction, Mrs. Weasley busied herself with fussing over her husband, and it was only once Percy had edged through the room and been pulled into a hug by his mother that Harry recognised the object in Percy's hand, sticking out awkwardly behind Mrs. Weasley. "My firebolt!" Harry exclaimed in surprised delight. The entire room jumped with surprise, and then followed Harry's gaze to Percy's right hand. He was clutching a slightly beaten up but still magnificent broomstick. A firebolt. Harry's firebolt. Percy went on to explain that he had found the broomstick in a basement chamber of the Ministry in preparation for the trials of criminals in the recent war. He also handed Harry a letter from Kingsley appealing for information about certain events during the war. "I'm sorry, Harry. I know it must be difficult for you," Percy began apologetically, "but any information you have will help us bring these people to justice and can help us to inform family members of how their loved ones died. To give them closure," he finished, with solemn tone and expression. "Well, Harry began, unsure of exactly what to say. It would be hard, but then an image came to mind of Andromeda, left alone with Teddy, and resolved to ensure that no one would be left to feel alone again." He looked down at the list of names and events, and found tears leaving his eyes, but also hairs stood on their ends and rage boiled through his veins as he read others. Ginny paced over to him and squeezed his hand reassuringly. "I've written a letter to Kingsley about something else," Harry began, finding resolve with Ginny's touch. "I'll add to that, and send it to him as soon as possible," Harry concluded, his voice sounding much more confident than he felt. And then Mrs. Weasley averted the many eyes that had fixed themselves onto Harry away from him by announcing, "Dinner's ready," placing the plate that she had laid for Fred back on the table for Percy, as if she had always expected him to be joining them for dinner tonight.